Picture a concert. Backstage. 1 hour before doors open. A security guard stands at a steel door with a scanner in his hand, and a line of people are holding up laminated passes, all of them printed, all of them official-looking, all of them expecting to walk straight through. One by one he scans them. Beep. 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 Green light. Green light. Green light. Over and over. Almost boring in how routine it is. Nobody in that line is nervous. Why would they be? They've all got the exact same laminated card everyone else is holding. And then one man steps up, holds out his pass with total confidence, and the scanner flashes red. He argues. He says, "I've been coming to these shows for years. I know the band." Check again. The guard checks again. Still red. The pass looks real. It reads real. It just isn't. Here's the actual question this video is answering today. And it's not the one most people think Jesus is asking. Almost everybody assumes the narrow gate is a warning aimed outward at the skeptics, the outsiders, the people who haven't signed on yet and probably never will. That is almost exactly backwards. Read what Jesus says 2 verses after the narrow gate, and you'll find him looking directly at people holding up passes they were certain would scan. So, who is Jesus actually talking about here? Not who you'd probably guess. And once you see it, you're going to want to go back and read the whole passage again, because it changes who this warning was written for, and there's a real chance it's written for you. Let's set the scene properly first. Because the setting matters more than most retellings admit, Jesus has just finished telling this crowd, standing on a hillside, enter through the narrow gate. Because the gate is wide and the road is easy, that leads to destruction. And many go that way. Narrow is the gate, and hard is the road that leads to life, and few find it. Most sermons stop right there, treat it as a standalone, saying, and move on. Don't stop there. Jesus doesn't. Watch what he says next. In the very next breath, to the very same crowd, beware of false prophets, he says, who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. Notice that carefully. Not wolves that look like wolves, easy to spot from a distance. Wolves wearing the exact outfit of the flock they're already standing in. Here's a detail that makes that image land harder than it might at first. Wolves were a real, constant, practical danger to shepherds in first-century Galilee, not a symbol pulled out of thin air. A wolf that looked like a wolf was manageable. Shepherds carried a rod for exactly that threat, and dogs, and each other, working in groups because everyone knew the danger. What nobody had a defense against was a predator that had somehow gotten inside the fold wearing the fleece of the flock itself, moving among the sheep undetected until it was already too late. That's the specific, concrete danger Jesus is naming, not an obvious threat you can see coming. One you can't. You will know them by their fruit, he says, not by their outfit, not by their vocabulary, not by how confidently they hold up the pass. And then it gets sharper. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and cast out demons in your name, and do many mighty works in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me. You, workers of lawlessness, sit with that for a second, because it matters more than it might feel like right now. These aren't people denying Jesus. These are people calling him Lord, twice, back to back, like they're used to saying it, the way someone repeats a title they've said 1,000 times before without a second thought. These are people with a resume: prophecy, exorcism, miracles, all done publicly, all done in his name. If this warning was aimed at outsiders, none of this makes any sense. Outsiders don't call him Lord. Outsiders don't have a portfolio of ministry accomplishments to list in their own defense at the exact moment they're being turned away. This is a warning for people standing at the door holding up a pass, fully expecting green light, green light, green light, and getting something else entirely. Now, here's the word that unlocks the whole thing. And it's easy to miss in English because the translation flattens it. When Jesus says, "I never knew you," the Greek word behind knew is ginosko. And ginosko doesn't mean what casual English know means. English know covers everything from knowing a fact to knowing your own spouse, one word doing two very different jobs. Ginosko, in this kind of sentence, is the relational end of that spectrum. It's the same family of word used all the way back in Genesis for a husband and wife knowing each other. Not and formation. Intimacy. Jesus isn't saying, "I don't have a file on you." He's saying we were never actually close. Well, here's a detail that helps this land. Because it isn't just a modern Bible study observation, it's baked into how the word was already used centuries before Jesus. In the prophets, he and this crowd both knew by heart. God tells Jeremiah, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you." The prophet Amos records God saying to Israel, "You only have I known of all the families of the earth." Neither of those is God claiming information he lacked otherwise, as if the God who made the universe was somehow missing data on Jeremiah's birth date. It's covenant language, chosen relationship language. So when Jesus reaches for the exact same verb centuries later and says, "I never knew you," he's speaking the family's own dialect. He's saying you were never actually inside this relationship, no matter how loudly you announced that you were. And that's the twist most people miss entirely when they read this passage. The scariest line in this whole section of the Sermon on the Mount isn't aimed at the person who's never opened a Bible. It's aimed at the person who's been in church their whole life, who knows the songs, who can quote the verses, who has genuinely done real, visible, public things in Jesus' name, and who has quietly let all of that substitute for actually knowing him. Doing things for someone and knowing someone are not the same category. And this passage is built entirely around that gap. Maybe that's uncomfortably close to home. Maybe you've spent years being the reliable one, the one who shows up, who serves, who says the right things at the right moments, while the actual relationship underneath all that activity went quiet a long time ago and nobody, including you, ever noticed it happening. Here's a second word worth slowing down for, because it sharpens exactly what's being rejected. Jesus doesn't call these people sinners. Using the ordinary Greek word for that, hamartoloi, he calls them workers of anomia, a word built from nomos, law, with a prefix that negates it, lawlessness. And that word choice is deliberate, because these aren't people who never knew the law. These are people who had it, who could quote it, who built an entire public ministry that looked lawful on the outside, while something underneath it never actually submitted to the relationship the law was supposed to point toward. Anomia isn't ignorance of the rules. It's activity running parallel to the relationship instead of flowing out of it. Quick word before we keep going, because if a single Greek verb quietly reframing an entire passage is the kind of thing you want more of, this channel does exactly that, every week. So if this is helping, take a second and hit subscribe. It genuinely helps more people find videos like this one. Here's a small, practical detail worth knowing about first-century itinerant prophets, because it explains why Jesus brings this up right here and not somewhere else. Traveling teachers and prophets were common in the ancient Mediterranean world, moving from town to town, staying with local households, teaching in exchange for hospitality. And an early Christian document called the Didache, written within a generation or two of Jesus, spends real space warning churches how to test them, telling communities to watch what a traveling prophet does with money, how long he stays before moving on, whether his life actually matches his words over time. Because the pattern of confident outsiders showing up with credentials nobody could verify was already a known, practical problem before the ink on the Gospels was dry. It wasn't paranoia. It was basic church discipline. The same way a modern congregation might check references before handing someone a pulpit, Jesus wasn't inventing a hypothetical here. He was naming a real, recurring danger his listeners would have recognized on sight, because some of them had almost certainly already been burned by it. And here's the fair objection somebody's probably already thinking, because it's a good one. If these people prophesied and cast out demons in Jesus' name, doesn't that prove something real was happening? How can that be fake? It's worth taking seriously instead of rushing past. Scripture elsewhere is clear that spiritual gifts and even miraculous acts aren't, by themselves, the proof of a right relationship with God. They can be genuinely powerful and still be disconnected from the heart behind them. The same way a gifted musician can play a worship song flawlessly while thinking about nothing but the applause. That's an uncomfortable thought. If you sit with it, the activity can be real. The relationship can still be missing. That's the exact gap this passage is built to expose, not to deny that anything happened at all. It's not asking you whether you've ever done anything real for God. It's asking you whether the doing was ever actually connected to Him, or whether it just happened to be pointed in His direction. So follow where this actually lands. Gnosko, the relationship Jesus says, never existed, no matter how it looked from outside. Anomia, the label for activity that ran alongside that missing relationship instead of growing out of it. Put those two words together and you get the real diagnosis behind Lord. Lord, not too little religious output, but output with nothing relational underneath it holding it up. And it's worth naming the common misreading directly, because it's the one that lets most people watch this passage without ever feeling addressed by it. The popular version treats Lord as a warning about other religions, or about people who never claimed Christ at all, as if Jesus is talking about someone standing outside the faith looking in. Read the actual words again. These people call Him Lord twice. They cite ministry done explicitly in His name. There is no reading of this text, taken on its own terms, where the audience is unbelievers. The comfortable version isn't just softer, it's aimed at the wrong room. This isn't a brand new theme invented for this one passage. Either, it's a thread running the length of Scripture. Back in Genesis, knowing is intimacy, a husband knowing his wife. In Jeremiah, knowing is covenant before I formed you. I knew you. In Amos, knowing is chosenness, you only have I known. By the time you reach John's Gospel, Jesus takes the same word and turns it into a shepherd's language. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me, a relationship that runs both directions. Not a one-sided file God keeps. Genesis to the prophets, to the Gospels. The same verb. The same claim. Every single time, God has never been interested in being known about, only in being known. Maybe you felt that gap yourself, and never had language for it until just now. You can be sitting in a pew every single week, singing every word, nodding at every point in the sermon, and still walk out to your car feeling like a stranger, just left a meeting with someone he's read a great deal about. That feeling isn't nothing. It's usually the most honest signal available that the resume has been doing the relationship's job for a while. Think about how many different shapes this takes in an ordinary life. A man who can lead a Bible study flawlessly and hasn't had an honest conversation with God in longer than he'd ever admit out loud. A woman who volunteers for everything at church because the busyness is easier to sit with than the silence would be. A person who has an answer ready for every theological question a stranger might ask, and no answer at all for the question of whether he actually talks to God the way he talks about Him. A worship leader who can move an entire room to tears from a stage and hasn't prayed honestly, out loud, in front of another living soul in years. Different resumes, different Sundays, different corners of the same room, same gap underneath every one of them. That's not a small thing. That's not a minor thing. That's the actual hinge this whole passage swings on, not whether you've done enough, but whether the doing was ever connected to knowing Him in the first place. Think about that backstage door one more time. The guard isn't checking whether the pass looks convincing. He's checking whether it was actually issued, whether there's a real record on the other end of the scanner that matches the name on the card. You can print a flawless-looking pass. You cannot fake the record. And the terrifying, freeing truth buried in this passage is that the record isn't built out of your resume. It's built out of actual time spent, actual honesty offered, actual relationship, the unglamorous, unimpressive, Mostly invisible work of actually knowing someone and letting yourself be known back. So here's what this actually asks of you, sitting wherever you're sitting right now. Not whether your past looks impressive enough. Whether it's real, that's not a question you answer by doing more services attended, more verses memorized, more visible ministry stacked on top of an already full resume. It's a question you answer by turning toward the actual relationship underneath all of it, sitting in honest silence with God instead of performing for Him, telling Him the true thing instead of the polished thing, letting the knowing come before the doing instead of hoping the doing will eventually count as knowing. That is ginosko. And the alternative activity running parallel to relationship instead of flowing out of it, that is anomia. And it can build an entire convincing ministry while the actual door stays shut the whole time. You don't fix that by working harder at the performance. You fix it, if it can be called fixing at all, by putting the performance down for a minute and just talking to Him honestly, the way you'd talk to someone you actually wanted to be known by. Not the version of yourself you bring to church. The actual one. That's uncomfortable. It's also the only place this relationship was ever going to start. There's one more piece of this passage worth seeing, because Jesus doesn't stop at Lord. Lord. He closes this entire section with one final image, and it makes the exact same point a third time from a completely different angle. Everyone who hears these words of mine and does them, He says, is like a wise man who built his house on rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. Notice the setup carefully. Both builders hear the exact same words, standing in the exact same crowd, on the exact same afternoon. Both of them are close enough to be listening. Close enough that from the outside, nobody could have told them apart. The difference isn't proximity to the teaching, and it isn't how impressed either man looked while he listened. It's whether hearing ever turned into anything real underneath the surface. In the part of the structure nobody driving past ever sees, here's a detail about the actual geography that makes this land the way it would have for Jesus' original audience. In the Judean hill country, dry riverbeds, called wadis, cut through the landscape, and for most of the year they're bone-dry flat. Sande. Easy to build on. Easier than hauling stone up to bedrock. Then the winter rains come, sometimes fast and hard, and a wadi that looked like solid ground for 11 months can turn into a flash flood in under an hour, strong enough to take out anything built on that sand without warning. Everyone standing on that hillside listening to Jesus had either seen this happen or heard the stories. He wasn't inventing a hypothetical building code violation. He was naming a real, specific, locally understood disaster and pointing straight at it. So the wise builder and the foolish builder aren't separated by how much they heard. They're separated by whether the hearing ever got past their ears and into the actual structure of how they lived, the same gap, one more time, between knowing about and knowing, between a resume of religious activity and a foundation that can survive the flood when it finally comes. 3 different images, in 3 sentences: the gate, the past that doesn't scan, the house on sand, and every single one of them is pointed at the same question, not whether you showed up, but whether anything real got built while you were there. If this opens something up for you, the way you can help most is simple. Leave a comment. Even one word helps. And if you know someone who's been running hard on religious performance and quietly starving underneath it, send this to them. It might be exactly the nudge they need. This isn't a video meant to hand you a verdict on your own life and walk away. This is one study of a passage that has convicted honest believers for 2,000 years. And the richest thing you can do with it now is open Matthew 7 yourself. Slowly, past the narrow gate, past the wolves, all the way to the house on the sand, and ask the only question that actually matters: does he know me? Or do I just know a great deal about him? Houston's gone quiet tonight. And wherever else you're listening from, maybe it's a car in a parking lot. Maybe it's a kitchen table after everyone else has gone to bed. Maybe it's a quiet room where the performance finally stopped for a minute. May the pass in your hand turn out to be real? And may the one standing at that door already know your name, your whole story, before you ever say his, God bless you.